Hello, my name is Dr. Ernesto Lee, and we're going to talk about how to learn data analytics in my class. So let's start with the basics, okay? Let's start with how to learn in my class. And what I want to do is I want to talk about what makes data analytics and learning data analytics different. Now, most classes that you attend, whether it's a corporate training session, whether it's an academic course, oftentimes what will happen is that they're going to offer low-level lessons and give you these details in a straightforward and a presumably logical sequence. And then they're going to leave it up to you to connect the dots and see the big picture. So it will be very similar to looking at a picture of a flower. The beginning of the class will be like what you see in the top left over here, and as you proceed through the class, more and more of the big picture will be exposed. However, the drawback to this is that you have to sit through the entire class until you can see the big picture. That is what most courses, most training, it's all about. I have a little bit of a different approach. I always start with an emphasis on the big picture, and then I look to provide my students with at least one idea that makes them pause and think and go, I never thought of that. An aha moment. Only then do I start to dive deep into the details. You see, learning is not about remembering a bunch of disconnected details or passing a test. Learning is about unleashing the power of discovery when a concept finally clicks deep within you. If this resonates with you, then I think you're going to enjoy learning data analytics in my courses. I was always into high tech, into math, into science. But I'll give you a secret. I always hated math and science classes. And that was because of years of poorly taught classes and corporate training. It nearly killed my passion for IT. There was a guy named Butch Dillon Towns. That was my mentor. He was my boss at, it was called CBAF, the Continuous Electron Beam Accelerator Facility. But Butch Dillon Towns, he personally taught me calculus. And he taught that to me in a way that resonated. He made calculus seem simple and intuitive. And most importantly, he made calculus enjoyable. He showed me the practicalities of calculus and how it applied to technology and literally everything in nature. He showed me the big picture first, and then he drilled down into the details. Now, Butch Dillon Towns never took credit for changing my life, but he would always tell me to pay it forward. He believed that a teacher's job is to show your students where to look, but not tell them what to see. He taught me to see the class and not the subjects or the students. I obviously internalized those lessons, and I built my style around that. So in my class, what you will see is that I will look to teach you. And we're going to use data analytics as the tool. We use data analytics as the tool. I want you to understand that this is really a conversation. This is not a lecture. So I like to share explanations in a bidirectional and conversational way. I want to encourage your participation as opposed to giving you a unidirectional lecture. I'm 49 years old. I have at least 30 years of experience in this industry. However, I realize that every single one of you in the class, you bring a unique perspective to the class, and I want to leverage all of that. I encourage your participation. I've always felt that the way that we teach is sometimes backwards. In college and in grad school, I learned from PhDs who were presumably experts in research in their respective fields, but they may have been terrible at knowledge transfer. Now, I never doubted that they understood physics or calculus or computer science or data analytics or whatever they were trying to explain to me. I never doubted that they knew it, but I always felt like they couldn't really explain it to me in an effective way. So as a professional, I noticed that most corporate training and a lot of college classes operate the exact same way. I learned early on that if I wanted to learn, I was going to have to teach myself, and then I had an epiphany. I have to focus on intuitions and not necessarily focus on the details. That was my eureka moment. At least for me, that's what made sense. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of an unimaginative chef who only follows a recipe regardless of the taste of those who will eat his or her food. It doesn't matter how high class the dish looks or how many awards the dish has. If the food does not taste good to you, then it just doesn't taste good to you, period. End of story. I say that because every person has their own sense of taste, and every person is their own judge as to whether something tastes good. For instance, if a flower doesn't blossom, you don't blame the flower. You change the environment in which you ask that flower to grow. What does that mean in this context? In this context, I'll tell you that learning is the exact same way. You don't need to rely on me or anybody else to tell you if your food tastes good. But we often will rely on other indicators to determine if we learned something. Test, professors, etc., to tell you if you learned something. At the end of the day, you are the only person that can make that determination as to whether you learned something or not. And I'm not saying that tests and professors don't have a place in your education, but what I am saying is that that is not the entire story. I have had courses where I received a C or a D or even an F, and I learned more in some of those classes than in classes where I earned an A. And the truth is that tests are designed to be objective and easily verifiable. In other words, did you pick the right answer, yes or no? But I think the real issue is how well did these concepts in data science and data analytics fit in your mind? Did you actually experience the data? Can you apply what we talked about in a meaningful way? In other words, what I want to know from you is, did you pull any kind of intuition? Any kind of intuition. In other words, at the end of the course or at the end of a single class, did you find something to be understandable? Did you have a eureka moment? Can you explain what we discussed to somebody else? Does it connect to anything else that you know? Is the class or is the course, is it memorable? Do you have a diagram or an example that will stick with you for years? For years. And lastly, is it enjoyable? Do you want to revisit this knowledge? Don't study data analytics in a way that makes you hate data analytics. Do not do that. In order for you to have a deep and practical understanding of the data, you must have all three aspects of intuition. It must be understandable, memorable, and enjoyable. And you don't need to master everything right away, and you don't have to care about everything equally. However, any concept can be learned, and it can become intuitive if you discover analogies or examples or diagrams, and then jump into the details. So to get the most out of my class, make sure that you focus on understanding the core concept of what we're talking about, trying to find something that's memorable, and lastly, find something that's enjoyable about each lesson. I'll give you a quick example. I mentioned Butch Dillon Towns before and how he taught me calculus. He made it understandable because he said, Ernesto, you keep thinking of math as being equated to arithmetic. That's what he said. You keep thinking of math as being equivalent to arithmetic. And as long as you do that, you'll never ever understand calculus. You won't get calculus. In order for you to understand calculus, you have to understand that calculus is about studying the act of change. Arithmetic is about studying what has already happened, being and becoming. Calculus is about studying the rate of change. That was understandable to me. For instance, if I were looking at a pile of rocks with 3 rocks, and then that pile of rocks had 7 rocks, I can just look at the differences between those 2 piles of rocks and say, hey, there's a difference between those piles of rocks. The difference is 4. But calculus is about studying the change in those piles of rocks, going from 3 rocks to 7 rocks, for instance. That made it understandable. It made it memorable. Every time I think of calculus, I look at the moon and see the rate of change of the moon as it goes across the sky. Calculus can tell me where the moon is going to be at any point in time because I'm studying the rate of change of that moon and where it is in the sky. And that made it enjoyable because I realized I could apply this to literally everything. I want you to try to do the same thing in my class. Make sure you try to find something that's understandable, that is memorable, and lastly, help me out. Try to find something that is also enjoyable. To do that, to get the most out of my class, I need you to ask yourself these questions. Can you walk away with an analogy that works for you? And can that analogy help you frame the information in your head in a way that leads to future knowledge discoveries? Can what I show you help you to solve practical problems? Are you able to explain whatever the topic is to your friends or to colleagues, and what they want to explain it to their friends or colleagues later? Are you going to remember the essence of what we talked about years later? Can you find something, anything that you enjoy in this topic, even if it's just one thing? Will you ever return to this topic when you forget most of what I said? When I grew up, my mother never allowed us to use the word can't in the house. We just were not allowed to use that word. We couldn't say can't. She felt that the word can't causes your brain to short circuit, and the word can't always presents you as a victim. Instead, my mother would always make us replace the word can't with the word how can I, or the words how can I. So instead of saying I do not have or I can't find an analogy, ask yourself the question, how can I find an analogy? Instead of saying I can't find anything enjoyable, say how can I find something enjoyable about this topic? With this approach, I've seen people who previously disliked data analytics or data science or whatever the topic was I was teaching, I've seen them become curious by asking themselves questions like, what is the insight? How can I discover an insight here? How can I express my insights in a simple sentence? Setting this standard has helped many people take control of their training and of their overall education. What I want you to do is I want you to learn from the world's greatest learners. Albert Einstein said, education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned in school. Albert Einstein also said that the only real valuable thing is intuition. Da Vinci said, the noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding. I have a pen and I have one of these framed pictures on my wall from Socrates that says, education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel. But most importantly, the final one that you see on your screen there is that true learning goes beyond memorizing facts. Well, I can forget the equation of a circle. I can't forget that it's round. And knowing that a circle is perfectly round quickly leads me back to the equation. That's what I want you to get out of our classes together. That's what I want you to take away from this. I don't want you to remember what buttons to push in Tableau or Power BI or what lines of code to write in Python. Now, clearly I want you to know that, but I want you to know more than that. I want you to know the intuition around why you push those buttons, why you write those lines of code. That's what true learning is all about. And I will say this. I've always found it ironic that when people want to learn about something, say they want to learn about money, for instance, a lot of times we learn about money from academics, not from billionaires per se. And in our culture, we treat billionaires like they're rock stars, and we treat finance and economics professors as sages. I once did an informal study to see how many finance or economics PhDs were actually billionaires, and the answer was unsurprisingly 0. Here's my point. My point is this. The world's best learners, they have already outlined their thinking processes for you, and they encourage us to adopt and to adapt that. This is not about memorizing the theory of quantum mechanics. This is not about memorizing the general theory of relativity. This is about internalizing that mindset that could lead to those ideas. Let me just summarize with this right here. I want you to have a love of learning, a passion for data analytics. You might not love data analytics, but I don't want to teach data analytics. I don't want you to learn data analytics in a way that makes you hate data analytics. To be effective at anything, you have to develop a passion for that thing. That is what I believe. To be effective as a data analyst, there has to be a level of passion that comes with understanding the principles and the rules around data analytics. I can never make you feel a sense of vitality about data analytics if I myself don't feel passionate about data analytics. I can never share with you my enthusiasm if I have no enthusiasm to share. And so you'll notice that how I make my points and how I visualize the data and how I know what buttons to push, that is going to be as important as the passion that I have for learning it and showing you this. I have to personally feel a love for data analytics in order for you to feel the importance. There are deeper and richer levels of understanding than what's traditionally used. You can learn Power BI or Tableau or data science or data analytics. You can learn how to push the buttons or write the code and never understand anything deeper than that. I want you to explore a higher standard. Your own standards will greatly influence your understanding. External tests that I give you, they won't check to see if the facts and the knowledge that you gain throughout the semester, if they're comfortably connected in your own mind. When I hear people say that they hate science and technology and engineering and math, I don't think that they're saying that they actually hate STEM. I don't think that they're saying that they hate patterns and learning relationships. What I think they're really saying is that they hate sitting through classes that don't provide any insights or any enjoyment. It's one thing to not be interested in the topic, but hate comes from a much deeper place. I like to snorkel. It's like going on a snorkeling tour and getting left out in the ocean overnight. Now, that would cause you to hate snorkeling. What I'm going to show you are techniques that I have learned and observed in ways that I hope will help you to enjoy data analytics. I take great pride in reaching over hundreds of thousands of students, launching several successful careers. And with your support, I'm sure that your careers will be advanced as well. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Ernesto Lee from Miami-Dade College.